Hey, another instalment of my original story, Sister Matchmakers. Hoping you're enjoying it, although there haven't been very many views or likes. Hoping that will change. But there you go. I enjoy it very much, and that's the reason why I'm putting it up here. Anyone's got any... Well, straight on with it. Okay. January started off cold and damp. Plans were beginning to be made for a September registry office wedding. The two of them, having discussed it and decided they were slightly too old for a big church wedding, besides which neither of them attended church on a regular basis, and they didn't want to be hypocritical by having a church wedding. Besides, the most important thing was the two of them. It was their day, no matter which venue they chose. Leanne was to be chief witness. Tony was going to be best man, and one of Jane's college friends was making the dresses. At the same time, plans for Charlie's first birthday party, which was coming up slap bang in the middle of the month, were in full swing. The day before Charlie's birthday, Jane had just finished college for the day. It was a challenge, juggling it all. College, nursery, work. It wasn't all it was cracked up to be, being a modern woman. She smiled to herself wryly as she knocked on the door of the flat next to hers. There was no answer, and after having stood there for a few minutes, she strained to hear what she thought was the sound of muffled sobbing. Knocking again, this time more insistently, she heard footsteps. When the door opened slowly, Jane was surprised to see her neighbour and best friend, clearly not her usual vivacious self. Her eyes were red and puffy. She looked pale and drawn. Stepping aside to let Jane in, it was a while before Leanne said anything. Silently going into the kitchen to put the kettle on, she sniffled. "Leanne, God, you look awful. What's happened?" She could hear Charlie in the background, kicking up a storm, wanting out of his cot. Jane took over making the beverages, and the two of them settled themselves in the living room. Charlie could wait a few minutes. "Come on, Leanne, what's happened, love?" Blowing her nose and wiping her tears away with the back of her hand, Leanne explained the whole sorry tale. "I got this in the post this morning. He's got a bloody cheek, I tell ya," said Leanne as she handed an official-looking paper to Jane. Jane went slightly pale herself. The paper informed Leanne that Frank Adams was suing for custody of his son. "The unfeeling bastard. I'll bet I know who's behind it too. Those stuck-up parents of his." She shot Jane an apologetic look. After all, Frank's parents were going to be her mother and father-in-law, and she didn't want to scare her off. "What are you going to do?" asked Jane in a quiet voice. "I'm getting on the first plane to Seville, and I'm giving him a piece of my mind. I'm not just going to give up and give him what he wants. If it's a fight he wants, it's a fight he'll flaming well get." Leanne took a few calming breaths and got up to get Charlie. The boy was smiling happily, unaware of all the drama. "We'll get Charlie's birthday party done and dusted, and then we'll go." Leanne looked suddenly like a tigress protecting her young, and she gave Jane a determined look. "Frank is never, ever getting his grubby hands on Charlie. He'd have to kill me first." Chapter 7. Jane had had a conversation with Mitch about the events now taking place. Mitch had sworn softly and said if he ever got hold of his brother, he'd give him what for and more. They hadn't spoken since he'd left for Spain, and Mitch certainly had no interest in talking to him now, except to tell him what a swine he thought he was. The day of Charlie's birthday dawned cheerless and grey. Leanne was catching the evening flight to Seville from John Lennon Airport. Leanne was up early, finishing packing and getting ready for Charlie's party that afternoon. Jane came over to help, and the two girls chatted, trying desperately to pretend it was just a normal day. Nobody really felt like any cake or games, but an effort was nevertheless made for Charlie. At 6 o'clock that evening, with everything packed, Leanne put her luggage in the car. Jane had wanted she and Mitch to take her, realising Leanne was probably too tired and upset to drive, but Leanne had been insistent. "I hate airport goodbyes. I'll probably start bawling my eyes out. No, it's much better if I drive, me and Charlie. You and Mitch can pick up the car from the airport tomorrow and pick me up when we get back." There had been lots of tears as Jane and Mitch hugged Leanne and Charlie goodbye, almost enough to make the Mersey overflow. "You take care, show Frank you mean business, and don't let him walk all over you," advised Jane as she finally let her friend go. So with Charlie safely strapped in the safety seat, Leanne got in and started the car. "I'll give you a ding when we get there," she called. With that, the car pulled out with Jane and Mitch staring after it until it had disappeared from view. Mitch put an arm around her shoulders. Come on, Leanne, and Charlie will be fine. No court is going to give him to Frank." Jane shivered. She was getting that funny feeling again, and it wasn't because Mitch had her in a tight embrace. Having just finished dinner, Mitch was clearing up, so when the phone rang, Jane answered it. Mitch wandered into the living room, listening to one side of the conversation. Jane paled as she finished the call. "Thank you for calling. We'll be right there."